We now move on to the next important debate this morning, and all those members who are not staying for it, could I ask them to leave quickly and quietly? And could I ask Mr. Gordon Henderson, who's making his way to his seat, to move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you in the chair for what is my first Westminster Hall debate of this Parliament. Could I beg to move that this House has considered prisons on the Isle of Sheppey, and in so doing, I should explain that we have 3 prisons in my constituency: Elmley, which is a Category C prison; Stamford Hill, a Category D prison; and Swaleside, a Category B prison. Combined, those 3 prisons house almost 3,000 inmates, one of the largest concentration of prisoners in the country. And I'd like to begin by paying tribute to the fantastic men and women who work on the island's prisons. They are dedicated and hard-working professionals of whom I am immensely proud. They work in an extremely challenging environment, facing on an almost daily basis the threat of violence, with few complaints and a great deal of courage. Mr. Chairman, that threat of violence is growing. I have been associated with Sheppey's prisons for almost 30 years, and now I actually live in the village of Eastchurch, where all 3 prisons are located. Over those years, I've visited the prisons on a number of occasions, firstly as the Swale Borough Councillor for the area, and then as a Kent County Councillor. Since becoming the Member of Parliament for Sittingbourne and Sheppey in 2010, I have visited the prisons every 3 months to meet with local representatives of the Prison Officers Association. In addition to those meetings, I've been privileged to tour the prisons on a regular basis and have been able to chat with both staff and inmates, occasionally in their cells. Last year I was taken on a tour of Elmley, which is a regional prison, by the local POA representative Mike Rolfe. And for the first time in all my years of visiting, I felt a tangible air of intimidation on the wings, which was emanating from some of the inmates who were noticeably hostile. Mr. Chairman, I have to admit that I was really happy and pleased to have Mike Rolfe there to look after me on that day. In Swaleside, over the past 3 months, the special accommodation cells have been used for a total of 340 hours as a result of violent behaviour by prisoners towards staff, other prisoners, and on one occasion self-harm. And that last incident is an example of the increase in mental health problems amongst inmates. In the same period, violent incidents have accounted for 23 planned control and restraint interventions and 42 spontaneous control and restraint interventions. Now, there are a number of reasons for the increase in intimidation and violence in Sheppey's prisons. One is the increased use of drugs and so-called legal highs that have been smuggled into the prisons, and that latter part is actually an increasing problem. Consumption of illicit alcohol, which is often distilled from fruit stolen from the kitchens. Indeed, it is alleged that this was the cause of the disturbance at Swaleside last year that led to a prison officer being stabbed in the head. There's an increased gang culture in prisons, and that we're seeing not only gangs from South London and from Liverpool competing in Sheppey's prisons, but also foreign prisoners, particularly in Swaleside, which has a high percentage of foreign prisoners, forming their own national gangs, and that's causing huge problems in our prisons. There is the violence caused by retribution for non-payment of debts, debts owed by prisoners for the supply of things such as mobile phones, which I would point out that people these days can buy a mobile phone from Tesco's for a tenner, and that smuggled into a prison can be worth £300 to £400. So you can imagine that causes a lot of illicit trade in prisons. Violence generated by the recovery of stolen contraband, such as those mobile phones, is also a contributory factor. And then there's the frustration increasing, caused by a reduction in recreation time because of a shortage of prison officers. And that latter factor is a problem that I'm particularly concerned about, because unless something is done soon to increase staffing levels in Sheppey's prisons, then all the other problems I have mentioned will simply get worse. Let me again use Swaleside as an example. The target staffing level for the prison is 178 officers. However, they currently have 153 officers in post. Now, as you can understand, the lack of staff puts pressure on those officers who remain in post. And recruitment and retention is immensely challenging and are influenced by a number of factors. Morale is low, and that's hardly surprising when you consider the environment in which prison officers have to work. The police are dealing with people all day, every day. But many of those people are either victims of crime or people suspected of a crime, but who turn out to be innocent. The people with whom prison officers have to deal day in, day out, have all been found guilty of a crime, many of them violent crime. Prison officers feel undervalued when compared with the police. If a police officer is attacked and injured, the perpetrators are tracked down, prosecuted, and if found guilty, sent to prison for a lengthy sentence. If a prison officer is attacked by a prisoner, too often the only punishment meted out is a withdrawal of privileges. Let me give you an example of the type of violence prison officers face. Last year, a prison officer I know well, who works in Swaleside, was attacked by an inmate. The prisoner threw a kettle of boiling water at the officer. Now, such casual violence is not an isolated case. It happens on a daily basis. Now, thankfully, my prison officer friend's reactions were quick, and he ducked out of the way and the boiling water missed him. But he could have been severely burned. Mr. Chairman, the police took no action against that prisoner. That cannot be right. If a prisoner attacks a prison officer, or indeed another prisoner, then I believe that person should be tried, and if found guilty, be given as harsh a sentence as if the crime had been committed outside prison. That sentence should then be added to the sentence that the prisoner is already serving. Another factor in the difficulty of retention and recruitment of prison officers on Sheppey is the relatively low unemployment in our area, as it is in the rest of the South East. Last year, the UK Border Agency ran a very successful recruitment campaign which led to a number of my local prison officers leaving to join the agency. Now, I acknowledge that the Justice Department has done its best to get more staff into Sheppey's prisons, including the temporary attachment of staff from as far away as North Yorkshire. And I welcome those initiatives, but a long-term solution is needed. Mr. Chairman, the canteen at Swaleside is operated by a private company, DHL, which pays its staff a better salary than a new entrant prison officer. That is the nub of the problem. Yes, I'm certainly.
I congratulate my friend for securing this debate. I know he feels passionately about the 3 prisons in his constituency. Elmley, one of those prisons I've had the fortune of spending some time at. I hasten to add in a professional capacity. And what was notable then was that there was very impressive and constructive work available for prisoners at Elmley Prison, making sure that their time was spent in a very fruitful manner. But would my friend agree with me that it's essential that the prison doesn't use the unique circumstances it has to in any way undercut local businesses and thereby increase unemployment in his constituency and in the surrounding areas?
Yes, I do agree with my honourable friend. It's delightful to see here in the very small audience today that we have 3 Kent MPs here, which is probably unique. Yes, I do agree with you. But I also believe there's another factor with that, is that employment that takes place in Elmley and in Swaleside actually is good for the prisoners and good for their rehabilitation. But it cannot take place unless you have sufficient staff to be able to manage it. And that is one of the problems we face. And I believe that we need to have a proper review of the working conditions and pay structure of prison officers, including perhaps consideration again of regionalised pay that recognises the higher cost of living in the southeast of England and the difficulty of attracting people into a job with so many challenges when there are better employment opportunities available elsewhere. I believe also that the government needs to re-examine its policy on the retirement age of prison officers. It is simply unfair that prison officers and that police officers and firefighters are expected to work, are able to retire at 60, whereas prison officers are expected to work until they are 68, despite their work being just as physically demanding. Mr. Chairman, what goes on in our prisons is rarely something that resonates with the public. So the prison service never receives from the government the priority it deserves. It is a Cinderella service, and prison officers are the forgotten public servants. In many ways, they are as much a captive of their penal environment as the inmates whose incarceration they are charged with supervising. I believe the prison service needs both financial help and moral support. Now, in the climate of austerity in which the public sector is currently operating, it's perhaps naive of me to ask for help and support for the prison officers in my constituency. However, I am very concerned that without action, we are building up a penal powder keg on Sheppey that could explode with very serious consequences. And for that reason, I believe that the prison service in general and my prison officers in particular should be made a special case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A pleasure to serve under you as always. And let me start by warmly congratulating my honourable friend on securing this debate. He's quite rightly raised very important issues. He started his contribution by talking about the fantastic men and women of our prison service. Those are comments I would echo completely. And it gives me enormous pleasure to take every opportunity I have in the House to say how much the work of our prison officers up and down the country is valued. It is often unseen, as he said, but it is incredibly important. Our prison officers are the last stop in our justice system. They are absolutely essential, and we must protect and support them. Let me say how importantly the government views the issues my honourable friend has raised, and staffing and safety are central to everything we're seeking to achieve in prisons. And the challenges facing managers at the 3 prisons on the Isle of Sheppey are particularly acute, which shows the need for managers and local trade unions to work closely together to secure positive outcomes in the future. And I welcome this debate to discuss the steps that the government is taking to maintain safe, decent and secure prisons, to tackle violence and serious incidents and reduce staff vacancies. For those not familiar with the region, there are 3 prisons on Sheppey, as my honourable friend said, collectively referred to as the Sheppey cluster. HMP Elmy is a Category B local prison serving all courts in Kent. The establishment opened in 1992 and also includes a Category C unit of up to 240 prisoners added in 1997. HMP Elmley is the largest of the 3 prisons within the group, with an operational capacity of 1,252. HMP Swaleside opened in 1988 and holds 1,112 prisoners. The establishment is a Category B training prison holding long-term prisoners, including those serving life and other indeterminate sentences. And HMP Stanford Hill is a Category D open prison with an operational capacity of 464. Now, my honourable friend has quite rightly raised the levels of staffing in the Sheppey cluster. And I acknowledge that last year, a significant number of prisons across England and Wales experienced acute staffing vacancies. With an unexpected rise in the prison population, economic recovery in a number of regions made recruitment more competitive and challenging for prisons in some areas. These dynamics, combined with short-term retention and sickness issues, increased pressure on the prison system. And I've not sought to underplay these difficulties, and I'm grateful for the resilience and professionalism staff have shown in maintaining delivery under challenging circumstances. Now, over the last few years, we've seen significant change across our prisons and the wider offender management system. The National Offender Management Service has delivered savings of almost £900 million for the taxpayer, whilst fundamentally reforming the way it works in both the community and in prisons. A significant contribution to these savings was made by the benchmarking programme in public sector prisons. The benchmark applies consistent staffing models and routines to prisons of the same type, removing historical and unjustified variations in the running costs of similar establishments. It also provided a refreshed approach to the provision of regime, increasing the time that prisoners can undertake appropriate and meaningful work, training and education to enable them to obtain employment on release to their home areas, something which is particularly important. Of course, I give way to my old friend.
I'm grateful for the Minister giving way. Would he accept that, with regard to benchmarking, that the prison officers on Sheppey actually showed a lead and embraced it enthusiastically?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, and I do accept that, and the benchmarking was worked out with the help of the Prison Officers Association, and as he'll go on to hear it in a second, it's actually had some benefit for two of the prisons in his constituency. The impact of benchmarking on the number of staff posts has varied from prison to prison, depending on their starting points, but overall it has reduced the number of staff posts and been a driver of financial savings across the system as a whole. For example, the benchmark reduced officer posts at Elmley, while it will increase officer posts at Stanford Hill and Swaleside. Over the past 5 years, overall numbers of uniformed prison officers have reduced. However, the benchmark also changes the way people are deployed and work by setting the resource according to the work required. And nationally, the staffing picture has improved significantly following a 12-month period of accelerated recruitment. National recruitment has delivered 1,700 new prison officer recruits into service between January 2014 and March this year. In the coming year, the National Offender Management Service will focus activity on recruiting greater numbers to priority regions, those geographical areas such as London and the South East, very much including the Sheppey cluster, where recruitment under the accelerated scheme has not yet matched demand. Recruitment and retention of staff is one of the most significant challenges facing the three prisons on the Isle of Sheppey. The pressure has been most acutely felt in the number of prison officers available, but increasingly also for other frontline staff. Staffing numbers fell significantly despite recruitment during 2014. At the end of March this year, officer vacancies had fallen to 550 across the whole estate. At the same point, the three prisons on Sheppey cumulatively had 70 officer vacancies. In the shorter term, the prison service has a number of other ways through which it can support prisons with shortfalls in staffing levels on Sheppey. These include the ability to offer staff additional working hours, some at premium rates under a scheme known as Payment Plus. The service has also deployed prison officers from other parts of the country to work at sites with more acute staffing issues on a detached duty arrangement. Now, my honourable friend has raised concerns about officer pay and pension age. Rates of pay are set at comparable levels for their similarly weighted jobs in the same area. The National Offender Management Service reassesses this every year to ensure rates remain competitive and whether there is any need for change. Since April 2015, starting pay has increased significantly, and we will assess what impact this has on the recruitment of staff. We are, though, aware that certain establishments are having some difficulties in recruiting and retaining staff and are now undertaking a review of the pay offered in these areas. This includes the Sheppey cluster, and the review will conclude shortly. I would, however, point out that ultimately rates of pay and local allowances are determined by the independent prison service pay review body after having received evidence from both the National Offender Management Service and the trades unions. In terms of retirement age, the Prison Officers Association are discussing this with the Government and the Cabinet Office, and we will consider any information submitted to us. Regardless of age, it's important that prison officers are fit and healthy and able to perform their role to safeguard their colleagues and those within their care. And we're under no illusions about the scale of this issue. Assaults in prison increased to 16,196 in 2014 from 14,664 in 2013. This is an increase of 10%. Though this increase is partly due to an improvement in reporting of assault incidents following changes in data assurance processes, these reporting improvements do not account for all of the increase. Serious assaults, including those on staff rather than on other prisoners, have risen even more. Serious assaults increased to 2,145 assaults in 2014 from 1,588 in 2013, an increase of 35%. Deaths in prison custody have risen over time, along with an overall ageing of the population, including an increasing number of elderly prisoners. Around two-thirds of deaths in prison custody are from natural causes. Self-inflicted deaths are a serious cause for concern. In 2014-15, there were 76 such deaths. Though this is lower than the 88 self-inflicted deaths in 2013-14, it is higher than the level seen over the previous 5 years. Some incident categories in the Sheppey cluster have also increased, though not all. Assaults on staff have significantly increased, and we've also seen an increase in self-inflicted deaths at Elmley, though not at the other sites. However, assaults on prisoners have reduced year on year since 2011, and self-harm decreased between 2013 and 2014. Whilst we do not downplay the significance of each and every incident, and I wish to make clear again my commitment to reducing violence further, these statistics show violence as a complex issue which is influenced by a number of behavioural and situational factors. And there is strong evidence that an increase in the illicit trade and misuse of synthetic drugs or new psychoactive substances is linked to the recent increase in violence across the prison estate. This is also an increasingly prominent problem in the community at large, and my honourable friend will be aware of the government's intention to propose new legislation to control these substances. We're also developing a range of responses to the new psychoactive substances challenge in our prisons, including training of drug detection dogs and the deployment of urine testing capability. In addition, the Serious Crime Act 2015 has introduced 2 new offences which will help combat violence. One of being in possession of a knife or other offensive weapon within a prison, and it's, I think my honourable friend will agree, somewhat amazing that wasn't an offence before we legislated to make sure it was in that act that's come into force this year. And the other of throwing items over a prison wall, a common way of introducing contraband, including new psychoactive substances and other drugs, into a prison. Both of these offences will carry a penalty on conviction of imprisonment or a fine, or both, depending on the circumstances. And the National Offender Management Service has also established a violence reduction project to gain a better understanding of the causes of the current levels of violence in prisons and to ensure that there is strengthened handling of it in terms of both prevention and response. There are a range of actions being taken across the prison estate as part of this programme, and these actions include new guidance being issued to governors to support the development of their local violence reduction strategy, the piloting of body-worn cameras across 24 establishments, including both Elmley, with 42 cameras, and Swaleside, with 34 cameras, is underway. We've also introduced a joint protocol between the National Offender Management Service, the Police Service, and the Crown Prosecution Service for the handling of crimes in prison. And we've done that to address precisely the point that my honourable friend raised, and I want to assure him and the prison officers he represents that I take the issue he raised extremely seriously, and where there should be a prosecution, I absolutely want to see that happening with due penalty. We've also introduced the development of more rigorous case management of individuals with a greater propensity to violence. HMP Swaleside is delivering a pilot of case management as part of its work with personality disordered offenders. Whilst distinct from the main programme at this stage, this will ultimately contribute towards learning that will inform our violence reduction work in future. And we're investing £2 million in increased closed-circuit television coverage during 2015-16. A programme of work is also being taken forward to address the rise in self-inflicted deaths. Last summer, new regional leads were put in place in each public sector prisons region and for Wales to support staff in prisons and share best practice. Additional staff were provided to certain high-risk establishments, and national learning days were held on deaths in custody last year. Regular communications have been sent to governors and staff, sharing learning from deaths in custody and promoting learning from independent bodies such as the Prison and Probation Ombudsman. Now, I acknowledge my honourable friend's concerns about the prisons in his constituency, and I don't underestimate for a moment the challenges faced by staff at these three prisons. The significant challenges we face only serve to emphasise the achievements of staff in these three prisons, and I hope I've reassured him that I take these issues very seriously and we will continue to do everything we can to address them.
The question is that this House has considered prisons on the Isle of Sheppey. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m. this afternoon. Order, order.